And he's one of these guys who, he's like Clarence Thomas, black Republican who believes in pulling yourself by your bootstraps, rather than, to me, understanding the systemic racism that African Americans face in this country and other minorities. He doesn't get it, neither does Clarence.
Right.
And that's why they're Republicans.
Yeah.
And see, the audience laughed there. Sometimes people don't think about these things. It's not that some of what Joy was saying was right, even though to me, she doesn't have the right to tell Tim Scott or anybody else to sit this one out. And neoliberals like her, especially white neoliberals like her, think that they have the right to just talk to black people any kind of way, and you don't. And you don't have a right to talk to Tim Scott any kind of way just because he is a Republican. The part that she didn't get right, and let's parse out her words a little bit. Let's go deeper. Let's put those up, please. He's one of these guys like Clarence Thomas, black Republican, who believes in pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, rather than understanding the systemic racism that African Americans face in this country and other minorities. He doesn't get it. Neither does Clarence. That's why they're Republicans. Now it is clear, and put Max up too, that he doesn't seem to get it, Max. Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas doesn't seem to get it either, even though he came up in a different era and should get it more than most black people, especially Tim Scott, because he actually endured it through his lifetime. Clarence Thomas also was someone who admired Minister Malcolm X, and we know that Minister Malcolm X indicted this country and told the absolute truth about this country and the positioning of black people. Why he has strayed so far from that, God only knows, but here we are today. What I take exception with what Joy Behar said is that this is why they're Republicans. And you saw and heard, the audience laugh. It's not, you cannot distill down the vestiges of inequities and the weight that African Americans have had to carry generation after generation. You cannot just simply label that, it's because they're Republicans, because that is not the reason why this is happening. While it is true they are Republicans, there are people in the Democratic Party who feel a similar ways. They might not articulate it in the same fashion, but they feel similarly as a Tim Scott does. And as a matter of fact, we're gonna show a clip after your comments of the current vice president basically saying the same thing that Tim Scott has said. So for me, it is bigger than them just being Republicans. It is about a mentality. It is about a consciousness that these men and others who think like them, whether they're black, white, Hispanic, or somewhere in between, it is a consciousness level. And these men somehow lack that consciousness level. Clarence Thomas has lost his. I'm not sure if Tim Scott ever had one, but it's not just because they are Republicans. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. I mean, does Tim Scott understand racism? I don't know. He doesn't talk like someone who's interested in sharing anything he's learned to help us. But I have to assume he does. I mean, no one gets to Malcolm X and not unaware of what racism is. But the reality is the Joy Behar situation is the same thing that happens with a lot of well-meaning white Democrats, is that you take a seed of a conversation and take it far too far to a lecture. And you're right. I mean, essentially what it is saying this is a Republican problem, racism, and people like Tim Scott. And so watching The View, can feel good because at least I'm okay. It's not my problem to deal with. Let them solve it. And it excuses you from being an active participant in one of the biggest conversations in the country. And it's not helpful, and it is very condescending in a way that I think locks people out of a conversation we could actually be having.
Yeah, Max, that's exactly right. And in some ways, Joy Behar makes it worse. To your point about now, a lot of well-meaning, and I question whether they're well-meaning, but I hear what you're saying. A lot of well-meaning whites can say, that's not me, when in fact, some of the very same thoughts and practices are there with those well-meaning whites. It's just that they don't have a TV show and we don't know necessarily what they're thinking and what they're feeling. Now, this is the same Joy Behar who said that the residents of East Palestine, a majority white working class community, when in fact that train derailed, releasing chemicals all over East Palestine, Ohio. She said that they deserved what they got because they voted for Trump. This is that same Joy Behar. So while sometimes she may appear to be enlightened, she absolutely is not enlightened at all. Because even to say something like that, it has a class dynamic too. So I want people to be careful about when they listen to these people, really what they're standing for and really what they're saying. And again, I wonder if Joy Behar would have the same heat for the current vice president, who had a very ambiguous response to the question of racism in America when she was asked about the comments made by Senator Tim Scott in 2021. This headline: Kamala Harris agrees with Tim Scott that America not a racist country, but says must speak truth on racism. Now, I know you all might be scratching your head because one of those things don't belong. And that's why I said it's ambiguous, because it doesn't make sense what this headline says. But this headline is actually quoting the current vice president, and it cannot be both of these things. And here is the current vice president in her own words.
I believe that we need to address, well, first of all, no, I don't think America is a racist country, but we also do have to speak truth about the history of racism in our country and its existence today.
So Max, to me, that it just doesn't make sense. Her statements are in conflict with one another. So whether it's her, and so my major point by reminding people what she said is to really point out that if Joy Behar or anybody else really is deeply concerned about anti-Black racism, deeply concerned about making sure that this country answers for its sins, that there's really truth and reconciliation and reparations and all the things that will need to happen to really atone for one of the greatest sins that this country before its founding and even after its founding created and relished in, and what led this country to be a hegemonic nation. If they're really concerned about it, then Joy Behar would have the same heat, the same critique for Vice President Harris that she would have for a Senator Tim Scott or a Justice Clarence Thomas, if it's real. Now, if it's simply just about personality, which that's what I believe it is for her and so many others. If it's simply about personalities, then she gives people like Vice President Harris a pass. But if it really is about the substance of the thing, then she would critique them all equally, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, whether they're Black, white, Hispanic, or other. Your final thoughts as we close out this segment.
Well, I think Joy Behar also needs to reflect a bit internally and wonder if she's the ideal messenger for this kind of conversation. If anybody is served by turning the lived experience of Black Americans into daytime reality television, essentially something that can be dismissed as entertainment. But with Behar, with Tim Scott, with Kamala Harris, it's the same thing. You make small compromises along the way, and you say, well, I've compromised and it's worked out well so far. I'm a senator, I'm vice president. If I just compromise a little bit more, I'll get everything I want. And in the end, you sell out the people you went to serve.